Reports are surfacing that Israel is mulling a major attack on Iran's nuclear sites. It's something we've heard before, but this time the Trump administration is in power. Those reports are alleging any action by Israel could come in the next few months. Could this propel Iran to make a dash for a nuclear weapon? Or will there be negotiations between Tehran and Washington? Let's break it down with our guest, Sina Azodi, an expert on Iran nuclear nonproliferation and U.S. Iranian relations from the Elliott School of International Affairs in Washington, D.C.
Only Trump can go to Tehran. Because of his credentials, nobody can accuse Trump of appeasing Iranians or being weak to Iran. So he does have a historic opportunity to make a difference.
I'm Negar Moshahedi, and this is Eye for Iran. Sina Azodi from the Elliott School of International Affairs at George Washington University joins us now. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. Good to be with you.
Likewise, let's start off with your take on the Trump administration's approach so far to Iran's nuclear ambitions.
Well, I think they're sending mixed signals. The main departure from Trump V1 is the dropping of zero enrichment, which then Secretary of State Mike Pompeo claimed in his laundry list that he announced in 2018 that he had demanded a zero enrichment in Iran, which was not feasible, and everybody knew that this is not going to work. But the new Trump administration, including now Secretary of State Rubio and Trump himself, they have not mentioned the word zero enrichment, which I think it's a clear departure from the previous Trump administration. I believe that Trump himself is very much interested in getting a deal with Iranians on the nuclear issue. But I also say it's mixed signals because of some of the rhetoric that is coming from the White House, including the reports and the comments that he has made that he would give the Israelis a green light to go after the Iranian nuclear program should they fail to reach an agreement with Tehran.
Now, why the mixed signals? And before you answer that question, why the different approach of Trump this time around, do you suppose?
Well, I think, this time around, he realized that the zero enrichment didn't work out. This is a policy that the United States had under the Bush administration. In fact, the policy of the U.S. was zero nuclear programs in Iran. But then when Secretary of State Condi Rice comes to the White House, she notices that this policy is not working. She calls it dead in the water. And then you have slowly a shift in the U.S. policy toward the Iranian nuclear program by the Obama administration. He correctly realized that without giving Iran some enrichment capacity, there can't be an agreement with Iranians. So we had a shift from zero nuclear programs to zero enrichment, but then some limited enrichment. But Trump comes in, he doesn't like it, mostly because Obama had signed the agreement. He withdraws, and the policy shifts back to zero enrichment. So this is a shift that I'm talking about. But mixed signals, again, because, again, he says he wants to have a deal. When he was signing that memorandum, he sounded very different from 2018. He said it repeatedly that he doesn't want to do it. He's being forced into signing this. He said he's torn. And when you compare his own statement with the statement that he made in 2018 while exiting the JCPOA, these are two fundamentally different, approaches that we were seeing from Trump himself.
And within the Trump administration, I mean, you've got very diverging foreign policy views. You've got some isolationists, America first. You've got some people who are more neoconservative and interventionist. Do you suppose that he's hearing these different perspectives and views, and as a result, there's that mixed messaging too, possibly? Or would one side win over the other? How do you think he's going to deal with those diverging views?
Well, I think Trump himself has very strong isolationist tendencies. I don't think he's an isolationist. I think he has very strong isolationist tendencies. His vice president is also an isolationist. We saw what the new Secretary of Defense said yesterday about Ukraine. The U.S. I mean, this administration clearly doesn't want to get involved in any foreign nation buildings or military interventions in the future. But I think at the end of the day, the lesson that people have learned from working with Trump is that he demands loyalty. So my guess is that, and all forecasts are one way or another doomed to be potential failure. However, I think that people understand that if they don't comply with his demands, they will be out of the job. So, and this administration, again, the people that I'm seeing, they will not stand up to Trump in fear of losing their job. And their clear example is Mike Pompeo, who was not invited to this administration, and the feud that we saw emerged between John Bolton and President Trump.
Now, how do you view Iran's response so far then to President Donald Trump? Do you also see potentially any mixed signaling coming from Iran as well?
Well, I think when you go back to and pay attention to the presidential campaigns of 2024, Pezeshkian ran on this promise that he would lift the sanctions. However, and I think again the public reports that I'm seeing, they've tried to reach out to Trump, including the contacts with Elon Musk, some of the comments that is coming from Tehran that Iran is interested in signing an agreement. But my understanding from what I'm seeing is that they're not sure which Donald Trump they're dealing with. Is it Donald Trump, the deal maker, or is it the Donald Trump of the maximum pressure campaign guy? So if- I think my sense is that they're trying to measure and see what's going to happen, or test the waters and see if there are any opportunities. The problem of this approach is that Trump's tension is not that long. He will not waste a lot of time trying to negotiate with the Iranians. And so he could move on if he realizes that he can't get a deal with Iranians. And then there could be potential implications for the region.
What about Khamenei's messaging to the United States and specifically to Donald Trump?
Well, my understanding is that he did say that negotiations are unwise, and that you can't trust the United States. But my sense was that he did not publicly and explicitly deny or prohibit Iranian negotiators to continue talking or to start negotiations with the United States. I think that they realize that without having some sort of agreement with the United States, the current situation in Iran is not sustainable. With the economic crisis, the energy crisis, and the regional, the shift in the strategic environment of Iran, I think they do necessitate an agreement with Washington. Plus, we have the Europeans who are extremely angry with Tehran over Iran's expansion of its nuclear program, specifically the support for Russia. And there's a very good chance that by before October 2025, they would trigger the snapback mechanism, which would reinstate all previously lifted UN Security Council resolutions on Iran. And it's only the Europeans who can do it.
Yeah, and that deadline is coming up. It's October.
Yes.
So we could see a lot of changes potentially in the next little while.
Yes, we could. And if there is no agreement between Iran and the Americans, or the Europeans rather, we would see a very good chance of restoration of the UN Security Council resolutions against Iran.
And what impact would that have, do you feel?
Very severe, I believe, because the sanctions that are currently imposed on Iran from a legal standpoint are unilateral sanctions. That is, they're not UN mandated sanctions. Yes, the United States, through its financial power, diplomatic power, and threat of extraterritorial sanctions, forces countries and companies to abide by its domestic laws. However, the UN sanctions on Iran are legally binding. Countries have to abide by them. Specifically, my concern is with the UN Security Council 1929, which specifically says that states shall take all necessary measures to make sure that Iran does not engage in prohibited activities. It's a very dangerous resolution, and I think Iranians should be very careful.
And when you say severe and dangerous, what would that look like? Describe that picture to us.
For example, states can stop Iran's ships for inspection. There could be a miscalculation. There could be a response from Tehran, and quickly. I'm not saying that this is guaranteed, but there's a good chance that you have a very small, a flashpoint incident in the Persian Gulf, in the international waters, Strait of Hormuz. An Iranian ship could be stopped for inspection, and that could trigger an escalation by Iranians, and then we could witness conflict in the region. And so I think that in itself is quite dangerous.
And so you're saying it could lead to more conflict and escalation. Is Iran in a position to be able to do so given how weakened they've become regionally and domestically in 2024 in your view?
Well, domestically, yes. I mean, look, the Iranian government does not enjoy the support of its citizens. It's clear that they don't. But I would caution against, just assuming that Iran has been weakened. Yes, Iran's air defenses have been suppressed by the Israelis. But when you look at the pillars of the Iranian national security, that is the nuclear program, that is the ballistic missile program, Iran's advancement in naval power, they have not been weakened that much. So Iran has the capacity still to create trouble in the Persian Gulf. And that raises the question of how would the United States or other great powers would respond to Iran's potential escalation in the region. Again, these are the things that we don't know the answer, but the consequences, I think, will be severe.
Now, speaking of that, Iran in recent weeks revealed a new heavy duty drone carrier ship, as well as underground missile base. They brought four Russian fourth generation fighter jets. Is this speaking to what you're talking about doubling their efforts in the military? And is this some sort of admission that potentially, again, regionally speaking, that their proxies are failing?
There are two separate issues, I would say. Because first of all, the reports on getting the Sukhoi 35s that we've been hearing for years, they've never been confirmed. I am not sure if they will ever be delivered to Iranians. And even if they're delivered, they're not going to change the balance of power in the region that much. On Iran's naval expansion, this is also not it is not something that is new. Iran has been investing its naval power for years. Yes, we've recently seen the inauguration of the drone carrier that you mentioned. I think there was the other day there was a new platform, underwater platform for the launch of Iranian drones. So these are all significant developments, but I don't think that they're necessarily connected to the events that transpired in 2024, especially in April and October of last year.
So, how would you characterize the state of Iran right now and its nuclear ambitions?
Well, I am specifically on the nuclear ambitions. I think that the fact that the Iranian state TV discusses the possibility or debates the possibility of crossing the nuclear threshold and weaponizing the program, I think it's a significant development. The fact that the 39 members of the parliament write to the Supreme National Security Council, they ask for revising the nuclear doctrine, I think in itself is an important development. But I do not believe that Iranians have made the political decision to go for the bomb. They have the technical capacity and the know-how of dashing for a bomb. However, one reason that I think that it stops them, one main factor that stops them from going for the bomb, is that the possibility of being detected by the Americans or by the Israelis or other Western intelligence agencies. And the concern is, and it's a serious concern, that if they're detected, the Israelis or the Americans or jointly, they could go after the Iranian nuclear program. So really, by trying to defend themselves by getting the bomb, they could be sending an invitation letter to the Americans or the Israelis to go after Iran's nuclear program. That being said, I do not believe, and I've written on this, that a military solution is not going to solve the Iranian nuclear program because, as I said a moment ago, Iran has the capacity and the know-how of rebuilding its entire nuclear infrastructure. If you know how to make a car, it doesn't matter how many times you get into a car accident. You can just rebuild the car, and in a matter of 6 months or a year, you have the same thing. So a military solution could, in the short term, postpone the program, but it will not resolve the nuclear crisis.
And I was actually just going to ask you, in response to the Washington Post article that cites U.S. intelligence sources that Israel will take preemptive strikes against Iran's nuclear facilities within mid-year. Apparently, the president of Iran, Masoud Pezeshkian, said, "Well, we can just, like you said, rebuild it." When it comes to rebuilding, you said that they're capable just now. But how long would that take? Like, are we talking months, years, weeks, decades? Like, how long would it take to rebuild, if there's like a big blow to Iran's nuclear facilities at mid-year?
Yeah. Well, that's a very good question. I do not have access to classified information, but the public data that is out there, they say between 6 months or to a year. So again, once you know how to make a car, doesn't matter how many times you get into a car accident, you can still rebuild it. Last time around, when the Israelis had sabotaged the Natanz assembly line, we were told that Iran's nuclear program has been postponed by 6 months. But we saw that in a matter of 3 weeks or 4 weeks, Iranians began enriching at the same factory to 60% enrichment. So I think these are all the concerns that, if anyone's thinking about the military solution, they have to keep that in mind. And plus, again, this raises a second question. If you're going to attack that program and you cannot destroy it in the entirety, you're giving Iranians more incentive to go for the ultimate weapon of defense, which means that you're going to have to launch an air campaign of every few months to make sure that Iran doesn't get to that point. The Iraqi and the Syrian case were successful because their programs were not dispersed. They were very much in the initial stages of their nuclear journey. But in the Iranian case, we have long passed that stage.
Now, given your expertise and your knowledge, what is your feeling in terms of like, what are you feeling right now that with how everything is playing out in terms of what we're hearing from Trump administration, the United States, all the tit for tat between Iran and Israel? Like, what are you, given what you're watching this. What are you thinking?
Well, my thinking that what concerns me the most is that wars usually start because states think that they have a opportunity for a quick victory. States that initiated wars, they all thought that they're going to have a quick victory. It's going to be short, it's going to be quick, and they can come back home very soon. This is the mistake that the Germans made when they started declared war in World War One. This is the mistake that Saddam made when he decided to invade Iran, all assuming that their opponent was weaker and victory was at hand. And that's my concern. The Israelis might think that Iran is at a stage that is very weak, it cannot respond. and they might decide to take an action. I think this would be a miscalculation. Sure, I agree that Iran has been weakened, but is not incapable of responding. And then the question is, if Iran responds to Israeli response, then what are we going to have? The U.S. policy, and we discussed this earlier, the current administration in Washington has very strong isolationist tendencies. And the Israelis could drag the United States into a war in the region where the United States is actually trying to leave the region. These are all the concerns that I have. I think it would be a miscalculation to think that this is a perfect time for going after the Iranian nuclear program.
How do you see this all playing out? I know we're very early into 2025, obviously, but how do you foresee all of this playing out this year?
My biggest concern is that Iranians underestimate the Europeans' resolve to initiate and trigger the snapback mechanism. They are very serious. They are going to do it by the summer. They will support potentially. They will support a maximum pressure campaign. But unlike the United States, I think their goal and objective is to get an agreement with the Iranians, not to just impose a maximum pressure campaign for the sake of imposing a maximum pressure campaign. And while I believe that the Iranians are aware of this, my concern is that they don't take it seriously. They
And why
might
is that?
think that
Sorry to interrupt, but why don't they take it seriously, do you think?
because of lack of communication. When parties to a conflict do not talk to each other, they often miscalculate each other's intentions. The communications are when they collapse, especially in the case of Iran and the United States, it is very difficult to discern the intentions of the other side. And that is my concern. Now, in the case of the Europeans, they have ambassadors, they have diplomatic relations, which is a good thing. But in the case of the United States and Iran, they haven't, had diplomatic relations for 40 years, and I think they've been disconnected from each other. And that leads to a lot of miscalculation and other issues.
Given your knowledge, what do you think is the best solution then?
I always say that what Prime Minister Churchill said, that jaw is better than war. I think that in the case of the United States, and I think there's an understanding in Washington right now that the zero enrichment failed in the past, and the demand of for zero enrichment will fail again. And my concern for Iranians is that they would squander this opportunity to get a deal. I recently wrote a piece that only Trump can go to Tehran because of his credentials. Nobody can accuse Trump of appeasing Iranians or being weak to Iran. So he does have a historic opportunity to make a difference. Whether he will take advantage of it, I hope he does. And I also hope that the Iranians understand that the U.S. is very serious. The Europeans are very serious. And I think the only solution to this crisis, I believe, is negotiations. No other solution can be permanent and beneficial to all parties to the conflict.
That's interesting. So are you saying that you have, potentially faith in President Trump as being, you said, the person who can come up with a negotiation? How would you describe that?
Well, I've criticized Donald Trump many times. Some of the things that he has done, I think, are embarrassing. But at the same time, I do give him the credit for being frank. And I also think that he's the only president that can change things. President Obama tried. He was partially successful, but Congress acted to derail the implementation of the JCPOA. President Biden also tried and failed. He was repeatedly accused of appeasing Iranians or being weak to Iranians. But I don't think any Republican senator can accuse Donald Trump of being weak or appeasing Iranians. That's what I'm saying, that he has that opportunity.
Do you think he'll take it?
I hope he does. As I said, his attention span is quite short, and that's why Iranians should not squander this opportunity. Absolutely, I think he will take it.
And what do you make of critics in the DC circle who say, well, you can't trust the Iranian government. They'll just build some sort of underground facility. They've done it before and haven't been forthcoming. What would you say to the criticism out there?
Well, I would only point them out to when the JCPOA negotiations were being conducted. The same critics said that there's absolutely no way that you can get a deal with Iranians because they're not interested in an agreement. Then, when the JCPOA was signed, they said that Iranians were going to cheat, and you have many pundits who predicted that Iranians were going to cheat on the agreement. But what we saw in May 2018 was that it was the United States that withdrew from the agreement. But in terms of making sure that the Iranians cannot cheat, and should they divert their program, they will be quickly detected. I think that in any agreement, and the agreements that they have been previously signed, adopting and ratifying the additional protocol will be essential. And I think it should be on the table, and it's something that I believe Iranians would be open to it. I think that there can be a demand that Iran would, in the matter of 2 or 3 years, ratify the AP, which would give the IAEA a lot more freedom of action in Iran to make sure that their nuclear program remains peaceful.
So you feel the people in Iran want these negotiations? How do you feel that everyday Iranians are feeling about it? You just touched on it right now.
I have not seen any recent survey of how Iranians feel about negotiations. But the last time that I checked, the JCPOA was quite popular among Iranians. The problem was the bitter experience of the JCPOA that we saw what happened in 2018. But I think that you can call it JCPOA 2 or anything that you would like, but the current circumstances in Iran are not sustainable with inflation, unemployment, the energy crisis. All those things will not be resolved as long as sanctions are remained in place.
Thank you so much. That's Sina Azodi from the Elliott School of International Affairs at George Washington University. Thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me.
If you liked the episode, hit the like button, leave us a comment. We'd love to know what you think. The Eye for Iran podcast series is brought to you by Iran International, the go-to destination for expert Iranian news in both Farsi and English. For more, head to our dedicated English website, iranintl.com/en.